Welcome back to Andersen Acres. We are here today because I'm going to answer two questions that I have received in the last week or so since I posted my sourdough recipe. Someone wanted to know, one, if they can make sourdough in their bread maker, and two, if you can make a whole wheat sourdough from that same starter. So I am going to do that today. I'm going to make a whole wheat sourdough in my bread maker. All right, it's actually really easy. You're going to use the exact same starter. I'm not going to go through how to make the starter in this video. If you would like to make the same starter I made, I will link in the description to my original sourdough video. At the beginning of that recipe is how to make the starter. It takes about a week. I'm not going to go through that all again. This is the starter, actually, that I made for that video. I've transferred it to another container, but it's the same starter. So let's get started. You're going to need your bread pan. Obviously, if we're using the bread maker, we have to use the bread pan. So the first thing you want is half a cup of starter. I'm using my quarter cup just because it fits in the mouth of this better. So I'm going to need 2 scoops of this. And it should smell quite fragrant. It doesn't stink, but it smells soured. And it should. It's sourdough. So 2 generous scoops of that because that's a half cup and I'm using a quarter cup measuring. So you're going to want to do that. I'm just getting quite a bit off of there. Put this back. There we go. Sorry, I was just sticking that in the sink. That's all the starter you need. I'll just put that there because that's kind of cool. All right, now you're going to need sugar. You're going to need 1 tablespoon of sugar. Sprinkle that right on top of there. Okay? Right on your starter. Sprinkle it generously around on the starter because that helps get the starter going, adding the sugar to it. Next, you're going to want 1 to 2 tablespoons of butter or margarine. Either works in this. I'm using butter. It doesn't actually matter which one you use. Butter or margarine is fine. Then you're going to want 1 cup of cool but not cold water. Okay, you want this to rise slowly to take its time. So 1 cup of water, but not cold water. You also don't want it to be warm water either. So cool water, but not cold. Now you need your flours. You're going to do 1 cup of whole wheat flour. And we're going to do 2 cups of all-purpose flour. And the reason we do that, not 100% whole wheat, is sourdough takes long enough to rise anyway. You certainly do not want to end up with a sourdough that's going to take 3 days to rise. This will take, as it is, about 10 hours overnight because of the whole wheat flour. So you don't want to retard that any more than you have to. Finally, top it off with a teaspoon of salt. Don't put the salt in the water because down in the water is where the starter is. You're not adding yeast because that's the point of having the starter. You don't have to use yeast. So if you have an active starter in your fridge, you're never going to have to use yeast. Okay, if you don't want to. If I'm making some of my other breads, of course I'll use yeast, but this works in almost any bread. So it'll obviously have a more sour taste to it, but this starter is good indefinitely and for many different types of bread. So now that you have all your ingredients in your bread pan, you're going to put this in your bread pan, select the dough setting, and turn it on. You're going to have to wait longer than your dough setting. So my dough setting takes about an hour and a half to complete the first rise. This first rise is going to take about 10 hours. So total time, I'm looking at 11 and a half to 12 hours before I can take this out of the bread maker. I suggest you do this overnight because if you try and do it in the middle of the day, you're just going to drive yourself absolutely mental. So it's almost 3 o'clock in the afternoon where I am right now. I'm going to come back to this, probably around 1 a.m., 2 a.m., just because I know I'm going to be up anyway. So I'm going to come and check on it then. But you are going to have to leave it in your bread maker and just ignore it. So if you have other uses for your bread maker, don't do this right now. That's why I usually make sourdough by hand because my bread maker is usually mixing something else. But in the interest of showing it for the video, yes, you can make your sourdoughs in your bread maker if you have the time. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to pop this in the bread maker and we'll come back tomorrow actually and see how the dough is rising. Remember, you're going to need 8 to 10 hours for this to rise. because it is sourdough, it takes longer anyway, and the whole wheat will slow down the process a little bit. So we'll come back. All right, so it has been about 12 hours now, and this has risen up. So now we need to take it out of the bread pan. Now this can be a little bit sticky because it is sourdough, no matter how we made it. So you just have to kind of, this is luckily non-stick because bread pans from bread makers are non-stick. So it's easy enough to roll this out. Sometimes we end up, let go, there we go. All right, so that took about 12 hours, which is a little longer than it takes regular sourdough, but again, it's the whole wheat flour in here that does it. But that's okay, so you just have to wait. So now what we're gonna do is squish that air out. A good squish, really nice squish. There, yeah, there are some bubbles there, lots of squishing. Now you decide what shape you want your loaf in. I could do smaller loaves, but I'm actually just gonna do kind of an oblong loaf today. What kind of loaf you do doesn't really matter. And this, see, it does stick because it's sourdough. And sourdough's always kind of sticky. Stay, come on. There we go. So I'm just gonna, about like that. Now I have to set it aside to rise again. This is gonna take probably about 4 hours. That's why, I mean, it's 3 a.m. right now. So it's been 12 hours since I last did this. But seriously, whole wheat sourdough takes a long time to rise. But as long as you plan for that, then it does turn out beautifully. So we're gonna let this rise for about 4 hours. Then we'll come back, take a look, and probably bake it up. All right, so our whole wheat sourdough has now been rising for about 4 hours. I wasn't kidding when I said it takes longer than regular sourdough. So it's ready to go in the oven. We're going to bake it at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for about 30 to 40 minutes. I usually go closer to 40. I always bake whole wheat breads a little bit longer just to make sure the insides aren't gummy. And I'm going to score 2 lines on my dough before I stick it in the oven. You want to do it right before you stick it in the oven. You do not want to do it too early because it starts to let some of the air out. But it does make your dough look really pretty, and it helps it as it increases in size while it's baking to not split out the side. So we're just going to do that going deep enough. And then, there we go. So we're just going to stick it in the oven, again, 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 to 40 minutes. Err on the side of a little bit longer for whole wheat breads. So we'll be back to take a look at how our sourdough turns out. Remember, this is a whole wheat sourdough. And there you have it. This is our whole wheat sourdough bread. It does work out. It does take a little bit more time, but you can use the exact same starter that you use with your regular sourdough bread. So absolutely give it a shot. Just be prepared to be patient. It does take a little bit more time for this to rise. But if you're willing to be a little bit patient, you can absolutely end up with a beautiful whole wheat sourdough loaf. So thanks for joining us in the kitchen today. We hope you give whole wheat sourdough a try in your own kitchen, and we will see you tomorrow.